This is Auteur Detour, wherein three film lovers travel through the filmographies of cinema's most important directors in hopes of finding a greater understanding on the other side.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Auteur Detour. I'm Ian Hinckley, joined as always by Chris Palazza.
Hello.
Travis is here.
Yep,
and we are going to the Coen Brothers movies still. Sadly. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, I'll just get into it. We are up to The Ladykillers. So in 2004, a year after their commercial and artistic sellout rom-com, Intolerable Cruelty, the Coens co-directed a remake of the classic 1955 Ealing Studios dark comedy, The Ladykillers. The Ladykillers tells the story of a group of criminals renting a room from a little old lady under the guise that they are practicing string ensemble, but using the space instead to plan and carry out a robbery. The plan goes off successfully until the little old lady discovers their crime and insists that they turn themselves in. Instead of doing that, they each take turns trying to kill her. But instead, in classic Looney Tunes format, they die off themselves, until the only thing left in the house is the little old lady and the loo. Now, I offered this plot without any commentary, but I will add, it's not just the worst Coen Brothers movie, it's also offensive and unfunny and uncool and tone-deaf and missing any of the marks that made the original interesting. And basically, I want to issue a formal apology to both of you for making me watch this movie and anybody else who's listening.
Yeah, I mean, that brings up an interesting point. It's like, how does this movie fit into the Coen Brothers filmography? Like, is it necessary? Do we need to understand this film to understand them as filmmakers? Could we have just like skipped it, honestly?
I mean, we almost could have. The only thing that I think is really interesting about it is that we talked a lot about, in the early days of this podcast, about the Coens sort of looking down on poor people and like really treating their like poor people as like shit, like treating them like they were, dummies. And I've been listening back. We've been releasing these now. We're a few episodes ahead. And like talking about that on Barton Fink or something, where it's there, but it's pretty like, I don't know. It's like a take that you can read into it. But when you get to this movie, now you're like, this is why people have that argument against them. Because the way that they just like have no like... I mean, they really do just treat these poor people like shit. Like, I mean, they treat all the characters like shit in this movie, but like the way that like Tom Hanks' character at least gets this inner life in some way, and then like Lump can barely talk. Like, it's like so bad. Like, I don't know.
Lump cracked me up because it's like, in some way, I kind of feel like it is an interesting movie to look at as far as their filmography, because like, they do things like Lump, where it's like, let's take the sort of like stock, like, Looney Tunes character of like the doofus, the town doofus, and like inject it with like a little bit of realism in the sense that he appears to be mentally like disabled, and you just end up with the worst possible outcome. Like, to me, it's like, somebody said one time about, I can't remember what they were talking about, but it was like, you have to be kind of great to make a movie this bad. Like, this movie has, like, a darkness to it, and, like, just a bizarre sensibility that you don't just stumble upon. You know what I mean? It's, like, a weird blend of stuff, and we'll get into it. But Chris, what was your take on the movie?
Man, okay, so I see what they started with. They're like, all right, Tom Hanks, everyone loves Tom Hanks. We're going to put him as a southerly gentleman, and he speaks kind of fun, like, in a strange way, like High from Raising Arizona in a way. And everyone loves Tom Hanks, and we'll get a bunch of different people together, and it'll be great. It'll be this crime caper that we love, so much. and it all wears so thin, so fast. Listening to Tom Hanks, I'm like, all right, okay, and then he just keeps going. Same thing. It's.
I was thinking of that high comparison also in this movie, and I thought of it last week too because the characters talk in Intolerable Cruelty in like a in a unnatural way, I guess is the only way to say it. It's just like that's not how people talk.
No, and
that you're surrounded by.
Absolutely, and I think the one thing, and clearly the Coens go for a certain a character maintains that character the whole film. So they're not always the most three-dimensional of characters, but this one takes that to a whole nother level where there's, I think of it like there's no code switching whatsoever, right? So it makes sense when Tom Hanks, greets the little old lady at the front. He's trying to gain entrance. He wants to be amicable to her. Like he wants her to let him rent his room. So it's all this and this. But then they're meeting in the cellar talking about the plan, and he's still got this bombastic, strange way of just talking. Like just ask Marlon Wayans the easy question. Don't be like, and where would this repository be located? Right. Just where's the money? Where's they keep it? You don't need to like why. And I get it. They like crafting these characters that are like an archetype rather than an actual like three-dimensional character. But it wears so thin so fast in this particular movie. I don't mind it in other ones because it's a little bit more of a quirky character trait, but this sort of defines Tom Hanks's character in this movie, and it kind of gets to me.
Well, I think the way they wrote the character, the way Tom Hanks, like just his like normal, the way he performs any character, like his acting style, and the accent that he's doing, and the snaggletooth that he's like hanging out of his lip, all combine for a character that's like not only hard to understand like from like an English perspective, but like difficult to like make out what he's saying. Like he has like not one iconic line, maybe the like we must have waffles. Where everything stops and he says it like at the camera and then he says it again. Yeah. Like there's nothing memorable about literally any one line that he delivers, which is in stark contrast to High or even some of the stuff they put in the last movie. So that's where it kind of falls. I see what you guys are saying with the comparison. I'm just saying like this is how it doesn't work. And then, you know what I mean?
Exactly. Right. And I think also, it's weirdly believable because of like the surreal nature of Raising Arizona that he would have this sort of biblical speech, because it's also grounded in his like, we talked about it in that episode, but in his like being raised with the Bible for sure, like that kind of thing. And like, yeah, maybe the professor in this movie is very learned, but like nobody talks like that. Like nobody is just like,
I don't think it's a matter of like, does it matter that anyone talks like that? It's just like, is it entertaining to watch or does it impart anything new into like the second hour of the movie? It's extremely tiresome and it's like, you get the point like, within a few minutes, and then it just goes on and on and on. Like I said. So like the fact that no one talks like that, I mean, that I'm 100% okay with that. It's really just, does it add anything to the film? No.
Right. Act wears way thin, way fast. And then speaking of, I'm sorry, no, go ahead, Ian.
I was just going to say, as much as I totally feel exactly the same way, I would still rather have them, the Coen Brothers, write Tom Hanks speaking like this than have them write Marlon Wayans speaking the way that he talks in this movie, because that feels so like I mean they wrote the script. I was like desperately Googling to see if like Marlon Wayans got to improvise in this movie a lot, because I wanted to like see if they were really being that I don't even know what the word is, but it's just like it's not appropriate. It's inappropriate for them to write that role like that. To be such like a...
When you hear the line... I was going to say, when you hear the line, he brought his bitch to the Waffle House, it's not funny the first time. No. It's not funny the second time. But when you get to like the fourth or fifth time, it grows on you. That's all I'm saying. It starts to get funny the more he says.
The way he says "huh" is actually really hilarious. I loved it. I chuckled to myself.
He's actually one of the probably maybe the best performance in the movie for real. Like I'm being 100% serious.
Marlon Wayans.
Yeah,
oh my God.
I agree.
He brings out Wayans' excellence.
Not Indo-Chinese Hitler.
He doesn't.
God, and that's
he doesn't
another
have a
one.
lot to work with. Yeah.
We kind of like. There's not a lot to talk about with this movie in terms of plot, anyway, because it is like. It's based on this 1955...
I do think there is, though. I think there is something to this movie that bears. But anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was just saying, like, one thing I would like to do, because there are only a few characters in the movie, is to just go through them, you know, because, like, you brought up the you know, Viet Cong, like, just with no inner life. That's just like complete caricature, like straight, the general, who literally like looks like he's straight out of like a Daffy Duck Slap the Jap cartoon. Like, it's so bad, like the way that he's portrayed in this movie. And like equally with Marlon Wayans, and then like, you know, who's just like doing his, listen, I want to say, Travis, you said best performance in the movie. I will say, I'm a huge Marlon Wayans fan. Like, I have like a big like amount of respect for him, especially when he does serious roles. I just watched him in that new Sofia Coppola movie, On the Rocks, and like, you know, he's very subtle in it. Like, he does like know how to just like, he's not great. I mean, it's not a great part, but like, he's charismatic and charming on the screen in that movie, and you're just like, this guy's great.
When we rank our movies at the end, we have to rank our Wayanses too. I've got some hot takes. Anyway, well, but like, you know, they've cast him like straight out of his bad movies, you know, because he's also made some terrible movies.
It's funny you say that,
and I say that having not seen a lot of them, but like,
yeah. Totally. I thought, like, this character felt almost like they saw him. I don't know if Don't Be a Menace to South Central While Drinking Your Juice in the Hood came out before this one, but I think it did. I'm like, did they just see that movie and go, oh, that's the guy we need to have in this movie? I mean, he dresses the same very much. I mean, even as the long, spindly kind of hair, all he needs is, like, a pacifier sticking out of his hair to be, like, that character, you know?
And Scary Movie had just made like the most money of any movie, like just a couple years before that. So I feel like that was like an influence too.
That's what he's coming out of for this for sure. I mean, it's probably right in the same year as also like White Chicks, and like he's doing all these, you know, Little Man. These are all in that like early 2000s, like terrible.
The Renaissance.
But then, you know, I actually, not to like, I mean, whatever. I don't even want to talk about it, but like, Scary Movie's pretty funny. Anyway.
Oh yeah.
And he's great. Like, I love him when he does it, and it's like on his terms. You know, like when it's Don't Be a Menace is a hilarious movie. I haven't watched it in 25 years or whatever, whenever it came out, but when it came out, I watched the shit out of it. I thought it was so funny. And you know, it just works in that, and it just does not work in this. Like, it's so. I mean, even his performance in this doesn't work. And like, mostly because I'm cringing at the fact that like thinking about the Coen Brothers, like putting pen to paper and writing these words.
So
is just
right.
Like,
and I'm not going to say it, but there's a thing that bugs me in movies it happens several times in this one. It's when a black person says, "What's up, my N-word," to a white person that they don't know very well. I don't know if you've hung out with very many black people or any of this. That literally never happened. Like I said, there's a thing called code switching that people do. We don't talk the same way around our friends to our grandma. You don't talk the way to your wife you do as your boss. So like, there's certain things that people just never say unless you're totally trolling somebody. And he says it like several times. It's just random people. And honestly, it just it makes me cringe every time, you know? Like, that's clearly written by someone that's just so tone deaf to the way in which black people interact with the world. And granted, I understand there's a lot of these characters are very one-dimensional, and that's like their deal. Like, the dumb guy's always the dumb guy, but it still makes me cringe, you know?
Absolutely, great point. And like, that's the thing, is that this movie never takes the characters and like pushes them to like a point that's like interesting, where something comes out of it. Like, you know, what's his name? Obi-Wan Kenobi from the original version of this movie. Alec Guinness. Like, he like starts from an extreme place. Obviously, he's not a character that is based on any real person, but he takes it to like such a silly, fun place. And then when the moment comes when he reveals that he's like actually insane, and that's why he acts like that, you're like, holy shit! Like, it's such like a fun surprise and such like a great movie moment. Nothing like that ever happens in this one. Like, Tom Hanks has like a moment where he gets a little serious, and that's basically it. If like you were saying, Chris, like if Marlon Wayans like got pushed to the point where he was like trolling with somebody, you know what I mean, or kind of dropped his like code switching thing and took somebody aback, like that could be like an interesting movie moment. You know what I mean? And I think Marlon Wayans can totally pull that off. And this movie does not even try to do anything like that. Again,
I think like the only moments that they almost get there in this one are when it's like the two-handed, scenes with Irma P. Hall and Tom Hanks when they're like kind of just sitting over tea together kind of thing. Like they'll have these sort of like almost realistic moments, where like they're playing their characters and he's still talking in this, Edgar Allan Poe, like Colonel Sanders mashup. And then she's doing like, still sort of like this caricature of like a black old lady that's not based in any, whatever in her life either. But like they do have like a weird connection in those moments that almost works. Like if it was like more of that in the movie, it would have maybe worked better. But I don't know. That's like the fact that like he was able to get this sort of inner life in those moments anyway. Kind of. Where like you see that like, I mean, just like because she like, he is listening to her. That's part of like what I was feeling about when I was watching this. Like, their conversations aren't just him like feeling incredibly more wise than her the way that he does with every other character. And that like she brings up something and he's just like, oh no, I love that. Like, this is my favorite thing to talk about. And they like have like a back and forth a little bit. Mm-hmm. And like every other character, he's just like, this is the stupid explosions expert that's like got irritable bowels. And it's like, I can't even talk about how dumb that shit is, where it's just like...
J.K. Simmons was too good in this movie. He was like, he brought too much like emotion to the character. It was like very, again, you can't make a movie this bad without being kind of amazing. Like, I feel like he brought so much realism and like kind of pathetic energy to that character. It was very upsetting to me.
But it's that same thing that like it really starts to wear thin on you when they're like easiest thing in the world. It's just like I'll do it. It's like it's that repeating lines thing that they're so good at. But like at this point in their career, they've lost it. Like they've lost their touch to do that.
And it's more like I'm sorry, this movie's also so like caricaturish where the lines that are repeated are by the same character. It's like their catchphrase. Mm-hmm. It's not like there's a world where like there's this thing that's said by other people who've never met one another. It's just the same guy saying his own catchphrase over and over again, which is obviously wears really thin really fast. We're over it. Yes. I can see how that would play out in like maybe even like the early 90s when there was a sitcom and everyone had their little catchphrase, or clearly back in the 50s and stuff. That might be even more in place. But to release a movie in the early 2000s where this is the case, and then they know better. They're so much better than this. There's certain little parts about it. I'm like, how is this a Coen Brothers movie? Like when Marlon is about to go kill the old lady, right? And he has this random out of nowhere that's never hinted at before, a flashback about her reminding him of his mom. The Coens are so normally good at creating a character and having us understand who the character is without a word being said, just by their subtleties. No Country for Old Men, which we're going to talk about later, is fantastic at so many of these little things. And it's like they just threw this out the window for this one. Like Marlon's all of a sudden like, you can't kill the old lady because guess what? We're going to throw this little thing in to explain why. It's not just that he can't
kill her. He's literally like on the ground sucking his thumb, being like infantilized. Like they wouldn't have done. I'm sorry, they wouldn't have done that to a white character. They were like, that was so racist of them to like treat it like that. Where it's like, it made me so mad. That whole thing.
They're just better at taking care with their characters than they have shown at all in this movie. It's baffling that they wrote this movie. I think it's funny because it's this first one in which they both received directorial credit for. So it's almost like they wanted to spread it out a little bit. Like, it wasn't all me. It wasn't all me. It wasn't all me. Ethan did it too. I don't know.
That's funny. I wonder.
Yeah. I do feel like they're at like obviously like a low point in their creativity, like with this movie. But I think to me that they seem like they've been like in kind of a slump or like another rut post Big Lebowski. Like basically, Oh Brother Where Art Thou?
But Man Who Wasn't There.
Even the Man Who Wasn't There, but like even the Man Who Wasn't There, it's like I almost feel like it was like an accidental success. You know what I mean? Like it was like it feels like it could have been from like that like kind of up their own ass period, like where they're just like doing a genre movie from an earlier time period, and they're just obsessing over all these details and stuff like that, and it just happened to kind of like fit their sensibility so well, fit their storytelling style so well that it just worked really well, and it a lot of depth came out of it. But now I just feel like they're just kind of like.
I also think that like that movie lent itself to their collaborators so much better. Like Roger Deakins and Mary Zophres and Carter Burwell all like shine in those movies, whereas in the last few movies or the last couple, like they're just anonymous.
Well, I have to
people.
say,
who the hell cares that they're in this? Like,
right. I was just gonna say, looking at the movie, and it took me 3 days to get through this movie. I'm not joking. I had to break it up into chunks. I normally can get through most films, or I have things come up. This one, I literally had to stop it and like come back to it later. But I'd say the only...
Rub your temples.
Yeah, exactly. Drink some water. The one thing that I actually did like about this movie was the cinematography. I think I like the way it actually looks. I don't love it, but it was... There's certain shots that make me go, this is Deacon's shot.
It's definitely
like this.
more... it's more unique than
Intolerable Cruelty.
Intolerable Cruelty, definitely. And I will say, like, Travis, you kind of hinted at this, and I agree with you. Like, if I have to compare the two movies, like, they're both such a like nadir of their career, but like, or at least so far, but this one is taking swings. Like, this one really feels like at least it's trying for something and failing. Like, it almost makes it worse because the way that it fails is more offensive. But, Tom Hanks, if he hadn't already done this kind of role in like so many Saturday Night Lives, I would think it was like the biggest swing he's ever taken. But he has like shown himself to be this kind of a guy that can do this on Saturday Night Live since the 80s. He's done this kind of thing. So, but even so, like in terms of movies, he's not a guy that takes big swings in movies usually. Like, I mean, he definitely did in like Forrest Gump.
Right,
and,
I was
like,
going to say,
whatever,
I think he does. And yeah.
But I mean, like, even when he's playing like Walt Disney last year or like Mr. Rogers last year, he's kind of playing like Tom Hanks, like doing those things. I don't know. He's not like really like inhabiting a character more than he is like just like exuding whatever energy he has.
Right.
And in this one, like, and in a few other ones, I mean, he will do it sometimes for sure. Obviously, like Philadelphia, like there was like a period. I'd love to get into Tom Hanks' career. I told you guys like I was excited to talk about him because I think just like the Coen Brothers, he is the guy that builds himself from like a certain creative place, whether it's like the 80s, those comedies that he was doing, to like the serious dramas he was doing in the 90s, to like, the historical epic. And like, he'll do these things until he gets so far up his own ass that he has to like completely reset and do something new again. And like, I always feel like that with him because this era of Tom Hanks was just terrible. Like, I mean, there might have been some good movies in this 2000s, like 2004 era that I didn't look up the IMDb or anything, but like, he's making like Polar Express and like, just these like really bad movies. This one,
I actually don't know a lot of Tom Hanks movies. I'm like late Robert Zemeckis, like late Ron Howard, that stuff like just never interested me. Like I've never seen Castaway. I've never seen like a lot of the big Tom Hanks movies because like it just wasn't where I was at like as like a teen and like a young adult like when a lot of these movies were coming out. But I think this period is really interesting to look at from a perspective of, Chris, you were talking about the visuals. The Coen Brothers have like a very like stylistic kind of like visual world. They always have. And now with digital effects, that kind of like the fakeness of the world is like kind of becoming like more and more evident. And they're kind of playing around with how fake they can make it and what they can do with that kind of stylization. And this feels like, I felt like Oh Brother Where Art Thou was kind of like really interesting, if like kind of weird sometimes, but like this one to me, I mean, it's like you said, they're going for it, but like where they end up is like so like grotesque. Like that first camera move down to like the sculpture of just like the ugliest, like looks like a peasant face with like a sickle or whatever. It's like, I think it's really interesting because they kind of like I think were a big influence on people like Wes Anderson and even some of like the I don't know, like the really stylish directors of like the late 90s and stuff that led to The Matrix coming out, and The Matrix being like the most stylized movie kind of all time. And I think
can see that.
the Matrix. I think all movies like there's like a pre and post Matrix where like every movie, if you remember, like in the early 2000s, every movie was like 99% CG and 99% like slow motion, and like they were like, oh, you don't have to just. It's not like the 70s where you just take cameras out and you shoot. Like every single moment is like pre-planned and kind of shot with like machines and stuff like that. And literally, that's how the Coen Brothers, I think, had kind of always operated. So they're like kind of indulging themselves with like, okay, let's do our most stylized, most like kind of Wes Anderson vision. And what comes out of it is like a vision of hell. Like it's like, you know.
Well, it's also like we're in that time period now where like, you know, it's been, 17 years since this movie came out. And that's, like, not a good amount of time to look back at, like, the CGI of that time, too. Because what I mean is that, like, you talk about how, like, oh, brother, it's interesting because they're creating this world and it feels sort of, it's mostly not, like, computer.
Yes.
It's, like, post-production stuff, you know, where they're, like, coloring and that kind of thing. This one... You know, it's things like they alter the actual river casino to look like the casino that they designed. You know, like when it's showing shots of the riverboat that they rob in the movie. We haven't really talked about the plot at all, but they're robbing this riverboat, and every time it pans to it, there's a real riverboat there, but they've digitally altered it to look like the Gambit Queen or whatever it's called. You know, and like. It does add this level because it's like the CGI of 2004 and like, I don't know, it does add like a level of fakeness to it that doesn't feel...
But there's older CGI stuff that feels better and there's, you know what I mean?
That's
and there's
why I'm
newer
saying, like,
stuff
17
that really
years,
don't use CGI. I mean...
I always say this, that like 17, like at a certain point, old looks... good again. Like, I don't know. That's the weird thing.
I disagree. No, there are huge periods of time where people do bad work because of technology. Like there's famously when like sound cameras came into, and this is partly like a myth, but like, you know, legendarily, like when sound cameras were invented, all camera movement and stuff like that basically halted in Hollywood, and like the majority of movies that were being made were super boring looking, and that never came back. That never, you can't look back on that and be like, oh, now it looks good again. Like literally, technological changes impact aesthetic choices in bad ways. Like it's not always.
Talk amongst yourself.
Okay. Ian has left the chat. But yeah, I think it's a myth that like things look bad and then you look back at it and then it looks good. I think sometimes things are just ugly. And this is like, to me, this is an ugly movie. And I think you can like, you can appreciate the aesthetic choices, the boldness of it. And even you can even like the look of it. I'm just saying, to me, what they're kind of commenting on is so like ugly, like their view of like the characters is so ugly, and that's all kind of echoed by the aesthetic choices that they're making. Like this world that's sort of like either like you're living kind of like a biblical life where you believe in God and like you just don't question anything and you're just kind of this simpleton, or you're like a conniving criminal with no God and you're like evil and you know, I don't know.
Right.
I wondered how much thought they'd put into that because, like, you know, I mean,
a lot of thought into that.
Irma Hall's character, like, and ends up with all of the money at the end. What's her name? Marva Munson? Something like that.
Exactly.
Well, her Jones College ends up with all the money.
Yeah, exactly. And she donates to like Bob Jones College, which is like this college that like historically didn't allow black people until the 70s, and like, you know, it's like, if that's a commentary that they're making, it's a bad commentary. Like, it's really cruel to that kind of character. Like, again, it's like, I don't know why they're like, the thing about the Ealing version, the Alec Guinness movie, is that like the little old lady is very much like the Tweety Bird's nanny. Like, she's like the very sweet little old lady that like you can't like imagine anybody wanting to kill. And she's just like this, like, you know, she bothers the cops every once in a while because she's just like always wants everybody to be like doing right. But like, you know, this little old lady, like, they're cruel to her. Like, why make her this like black person who doesn't like black people. And like, why make her like this? Like, I mean, because like that's her whole thing too. Is like she hates more than anything the other black people in Mississippi.
Well, she's conservative. She's conservative, and I think like old church ladies like getting in the business of like young people is like I think that's somewhat of a truism.
Like that's realistic in that way. But I mean, like the fact that like she's like donating all of her money to Bob Jones also, and like I don't know. There's just like a cruelty to the way that, like, I don't know. She's not a sweet little old lady, for one thing. Like,
that is true.
In any way.
That's certainly true. I think, though, that's a tricky character. I was thinking about this a bit myself because... Right, there's such a difference between Mrs. Wilberforce, which is a great name,
right?
The original old lady's name, and Mrs. Munson. Yeah. And you're absolutely right. I was just thinking how sweet and like just almost aloof this lady is. Like, oh yes, all these giant men who look intimidating. Come on in.
And she likes them. She's immediately happy to see them, that they're musicians, that they're coming into her house, and it's the more the merrier.
Right.
And it's like,
and to a degree, I wouldn't necessarily want to see like an older like. Matronly black woman just blindly aloof, because realistically, I've known a lot of older black women, and they tend to be more like kind of strong-willed, very kind of mildly skeptical about certain things, especially people, strangers in particular. I don't want to generalize, but I think by making her just this aloof, like a little silly white lady mannerism wouldn't also be doing that particular character justice, but frankly, they don't do a lot of fucking characters justice in this movie, so it wouldn't surprise me.
I would 100% agree with the idea that, like, if she had been some acquiescing, like, black lady, that would have been just as problematic. But just we talked about how bad they are at just even having, like, representation in their movies at all. This one definitely has a lot of black people in it, but, like, the question is why? Like, why have it be that way? Like in this, it's not like if it's serving the story. Like when I say why, I don't. This is a tricky thing to talk about because like we want that. We want them to be like showing all aspects of the world and that kind of thing. But like this movie is so classist. Like the way that like the professor, who's just as stupid as everybody else and is not like, treated like with more respect by the Coen Brothers, is like, definitely like thought of as smart within the confines of the movie. Like everybody that talks to him is just like, oh, this guy like talks my fucking ear off and like is very well read and like all this stuff. And then like every other character in his eyes and in the viewer's eyes is like, look at this fucking idiot. You know what I mean? Including Marvin Manson. Like,
but again, we've talked about this before, but it's like, I have a hard time separating like classism from like misanthropy in their movies. Cause like classism, like to me requires that you have somebody of like a higher class who's treated with more respect. But that character never shows up in Coen Brothers movies. You know what I mean? Like, and there's movies like we just watched, Intolerable Cruelty. I mean, yes, the characters in general got a little more like dignity out of it, but they were also treated like idiots. Like literally, like the smartest people in the movie were also disgusting, dumb. You know what I mean? Like all kind of like, I don't know. That's
I guess but feeling. I do think
it just feels to me it just feels different. Maybe punching up versus punching down, and it can leave a worse taste in your mouth when it's like a movie like this where it's like, why are you going out of your way to make a movie about like poor people and making them look so bad? Like that is totally a fair thing, but classist is like I don't know if I reach the same conclusion.
Well, I mean, I guess only because everybody in it is poor except for you get the feeling that he's at least impersonating a rich person, like Tom Hanks' character. He's going by professor.
The old lady has a house.
Exactly. I don't know
and
that
like
she's
all the church ladies
poor.
Seem like, yeah, they all dress nice. They
have a giant home. It's well kept. She's not portrayed as though like she's in dire straits or needs money.
Home for like $35,000.
Yeah, to me, I felt like they were like middle class.
And it's the fact that she would just donate it all anyway instead of like, yes, this is going to change my life. Like, thank God is, she obviously doesn't even need the money, even when she morally accepts that, oh, it's only a penny and barely few people are actually going to be harmed by this.
Not only does she have a portrait of her husband on the wall, she has a shape-shifting portrait of her. So obviously she has some money.
Touche. That costs a lot of money.
I guess when I say poor, you're right. They aren't playing like...
You're being racist.
Classist.
No, they aren't playing like... How dare you? I'm just kidding. They aren't playing... it's not trying to be the ghetto. Like they aren't showing like the poor part of Mississippi for sure. But I just mean the way that they talk about them, it's more like they're talking about like in the same way that Oh Brother, Where Art Thou is for white people. It's talking about them as like dumb, like... dumber than the New York intellectuals that the Coen Brothers, or not New York, but that the Jewish intellectuals that the Coen Brothers appear to feel like by writing these characters. I don't know. It's like...
Do you think that characters in like A Serious Man are treated with like respect or dignity? Like
I do. I really do.
Okay, we'll get to that. I mean, that's a very different movie. That's a very different movie, but
yeah, I don't know if that's a comparable example necessarily, but we'll get into that one. I'm sure we'll have to hold that thought.
Yeah. I'd say like the closest version of like when they deal with poor people, like we're gonna get into No Country for Old Men next week, which I'm weirdly nervous about now because I love that movie so much. In my mind going into this, I'm like, that's going to be like a contender for top spot, And now as we're going into this, I'm like, I don't know how they're going to do it. Like, how are they going to be good again? They've been so bad in the last two movies. It's hard to imagine them like, because I don't know. It's like, I don't know what they're exploring by making this movie also. Like,
what movie?
Ladykillers?
The one that we're watching, Ladykillers. Like,
I will say this. I can see why the original movie was like appealing to them. I honestly think they were like at a creative like dead end. And they, again, like the last movie was the first script that they'd done that they didn't make up themselves. This movie is the first one that they've done that is a remake. And then the next movie they've done is like, I believe their first book adaptation.
Yep.
Yeah. So like directly, right? They've done like a lot of like cribbing from books and stuff like that. And I actually have a theory, I don't know if I've talked to you guys about this, but that like in general, the bootleg version of something is always going to be better than like the actual adaptation. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think that's how creativity works. Like you get ideas from stuff and you make it kind of your own. And just adaptations in general can be like really, can be like a creative, like dead end. But anyway, the point is, the original Ladykillers has a lot of the kind of Coen Brothers flourishes that I kind of allude to sometimes. And what I mean by that is like the way that they kind of like in the middle of a story, they'll do like kind of unnecessarily dramatic camera like stuff, you know what I mean? Where it's sort of like they're taking the piss like out of cinematic language itself, you know what I mean? And just be like, look how like crazy we can make it. And like, so anyway, so it's, but then I also
Chris mentioned at the beginning of this episode, and you've brought it up before, Travis, that like their characters in all of their movies do feel like this, as you put it, I'm stealing your words because it really rang true to me. Like they feel like puzzle pieces that they're putting together. And like in those old Ealing movies, especially in that one, they're like, they are like the brute and the, angry guy and like the, the mastermind. Like they are, it is that thing of like, which I also feel is very Coen Brothers.
That movie works so well, like from a logic standpoint, like again, the way the Coen Brothers movies kind of used to work, this movie doesn't work. Like at the beginning, like they're building their characters so clearly and like with so much detail. And then by the time you get to the end, and they can't kill her, you're like, why not? She's annoying. She's like, she's like abrasive. They hate her.
It also happens late into this movie. Like the original Ladykillers is very short, and it's very much like, this is what we're doing. We're planning this thing in this, or this robbery in this old lady's house because she will have no idea because she's a batty old lady.
Yeah.
And then they carry it out and it's successful. And then easy problem, she finds out, so easy problem fixed, we're going to kill her. But through no act except for, it's a movie, like every one of them accidentally dies killing her basically. And it's like, and that's like the second half of the movie, if not more than that. This one is like the last 20 minutes where they become the Ladykillers and it's boom, 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 boom. They all make these stupid decisions.
Yeah, it's extremely not
it's very
It's
weird.
Extremely not amusing. But I just want to go back to like, why they made it and like what it says. Like, I do think that there was a very purposeful, like, the world of this movie being like set in the South, set with like the super religious kind of cultures of the South, that everyone in church is just kind of this like blank-eyed kind of like believer who has like just I don't know, like they don't have the anxiety and of like the people that don't believe in God and that also are kind of like striving for something more. Like the fact that she gets the money at the end and just wants to give it away to like a church group speaks to that too. Like in Coen Brothers movies, there's these characters that are like filled with anxiety and filled with like ambition that they can't realize because of their own personal faults or because of fate. And this movie is like all about that. And again, they always juxtapose like those kind of striving people with people that are just kind of like satisfied like in their society, like being a part of like the people, like a community and stuff like that. So this makes it real, like it's a very heavy-handed version of it, but that's what I think they're kind of doing with that. The fact that everyone in church is just like smiling and kind of like clapping along like they've been lobotomized. And then like the beginning of the movie where like they're taking the trash out under the bridge and that song is playing like Let's Go Back to God, which has this very dark kind of like undercurrent because of like where the plot is going to take us. Like I said, I think there's like because of their kind of like godless universe that they kind of like have behind all their movies. I think in the last movie they tried to play it up like as fun, but in this movie it really comes through as like there's no God, there's no order, there's like there's no salvation except for like in your mind. It was kind of disturbing.
No, you're right. There's that nihilism really comes back around in this particular one. Like,
yes,
and the heavy-handedness of Big Lebowski, and it's like, that's it, you know? It's that somber. There's the Coen Brothers, you know? Like, it's buried under there somewhere.
Well, and I talked about that briefly in our, the man who wasn't there thing about how like one take for that title even is just that like there's no God there for you, that like you're just, and I feel like they are pretty not abstractly in that zone, like they've got this sort of like nihilistic, if not nihilistic, then at least like absurdist view of the world.
Absurdist is just good word, yeah.
Where it's like everything is, like everybody's just a tumbleweed rolling around, bumping into each other, and like, this has that too for sure, but it doesn't really. Part of the reason why it doesn't fit for me is because the whole God part of it, the gospel part of it, I should say, feels so thirsty for that like "Oh brother, where art thou" bump, in the way that like "Oh brother, where art thou" was like given this huge commercial success based on its soundtrack in a way that the movie like that eclipsed the movie itself,
Yes.
And like this movie also music supervised by T-Bone Burnett, and they have these like full songs in the center of it, or not even in the center of it, just like throughout the movie.
Yep.
And like it feels like it's not even like I don't like the songs. I love the songs in this movie if they were,
but they're
not used this way.
They're robbed of their meaning
click.
by the movie. Like literally,
Exactly.
the movie is like undercutting the message of the songs, like through like.
Whereas like
it's
even
in a really dark kind of way.
Yeah, absolutely. And even you who doesn't like "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou," Travis, like have admitted that like the soundtrack was like a phenomenon and it's great.
No,
and
I like the soundtrack. Yeah.
And it's like this one was going for that. Like it feels thirsty for it though. It's like it doesn't feel like they were making a musical in the way that "Oh Brother" was like a weird backhanded musical. It just feels like, oh, maybe this one will also take over the way that bluegrass took over or old timey music took over in the 2001. Maybe this will be the gospel year.
Yeah, I also feel like they're kind of
getting
getting lost in like the details of the story and of the characters, and like the movie experience itself kind of suffers for it. I remember thinking that like not only did they wait so long to kind of introduce the gang, but also in the little vignettes that they show of each character, I don't know which character is being introduced.
Exactly.
Like there's no like clear like
totally exactly. You know what? It's so funny you said that because I've been meaning to talk about like some of the intros when they introduced the general. Aldous Hodge, I don't know if you know him. He's in The Invisible Man and a couple other great movies. I love this guy.
No.
He's a great actor. He's one of the two African-American men that sticks up the general's thing. I'm like, awesome. Is he going to be in this movie? And it ends up being the general. And it's this dumb thing where these two guys with potentially loaded guns are pointing them at you. And he's like, oh, I got him by the nose. I'm the general. I'm a badass. Like, no one would do this. You just, this is terrible. Who are we introducing? And then he comes in later. I'm like, wait, so that was supposed to set this guy up? Really?
Right. Yeah, it's very confusing. Yeah. The wife was like, kind of more impressive.
Right.
And then she's not in the movie. But
and then he says it he says it like 3 times. His fingers are up my nose. Like he says it 3 times.
That one made me mad. That introduction, all of the introductions of the characters made me mad, except for maybe Marlon Wayans. He was fine. But nobody more so.
The one
fucking say Garth Pancake.
What about
J.K. Simmons. That was the only scene that had like any comic energy. And again, it's like not like fun, but like just the back and forth between like the asshole director.
From the podcast.
I don't want to watch that movie, but like I have to admit that there was
a
legitimate.
Movie, it was a dog food commercial.
No, I'm saying I don't want to watch the movie like of that. Like with all of that comic energy, like I could barely take it for those couple minutes.
Here's my note when it got to that part. Don't kill a dog. That's not something you do.
No, they can do it. That was what was good about it.
No, it wasn't. No,
I'm not saying I like it. I'm just saying I have to give it up. Like that was like well done.
No, it wasn't.
A little bit.
I was watching it thinking like, okay, I get like. In a dark comedy, which is this ostensibly is trying to be like a dark comedy, although it doesn't really feel funny enough to be a dark comedy or something.
I agree.
But like I get it if like you want to have like show one of the like if the general had killed a dog, that would have worked for me because it's like okay, like the general is this like completely shark like T-1000 killing machine. That like, has no emotions. Garth Pancake's character, J.K. Simmons' character, which I just keep saying his name because it's the worst Coen Brothers name yet, Garth Pancake. He's like fucking, until we get to Lump. But he's just like a dummy that like kills a dog. And like for a dummy to kill a dog, it's like, fuck you guys. Like, don't do that. Don't. And then... The other note right after that is don't kill a dog and don't hire Greg Grunberg because that guy sucks. I hate that guy. Every time he's on screen.
Was he the guy playing the director?
Yeah.
He was like, again, like not a likable character, but like at least he was like a believable asshole. And then he infused the scene with that energy and it worked.
It does not work for me at all. I hated it.
The whole movie is
much.
Extremely unfunny. And that was one scene where I was like, I don't like what I'm seeing, but like I
watched it with Angela, my girlfriend, and like the minute that it started, she fell asleep, and I'm just like, please sleep through this movie. Like I don't want to have to watch this. But then she wakes up as like the dog is like heaving breath, and then like he's trying to give him CPR unsuccessfully, and she's like, what the fuck is going on? I'm all, don't just go back to sleep. Just don't worry about it. Like it's so bad.
Jeez.
Better than any Tom Hanks scene. That's all I'm saying.
I will disagree because I will talk a little bit more about Tom Hanks if you want, because I do think that, like I said, like he's done this kind of Southern, Colonel Sanders kind of character before on Saturday Night Live. I don't know when. I just know that he must have because it's like an archetype that I feel like he flowed to naturally. But the only laugh that I got, and it wasn't even a laugh, it was just like funny to watch him try in a weird way, was when he dies and he says, "A raven." It's like stupid. It's very stupid and not funny, but just like watching Tom Hanks like try in this movie that's not working was kind of funny to me, for him to like see a raven and be like, "A raven." Like that was kind of funny.
Just hit me and like had no impact at all after like almost 2 hours. No,
I agree with you. It was very dumb. No. I don't know. It was like,
I see what you're saying. I can see that moment being like amusing on some meta level, but oh my god.
I mean, only
his performance
because of who
was so
he was,
extremely unenjoyable and like
it's even more unenjoyable like as in contrast of the black people in the movie, because to me anyway, like he represented like a plantation owner in some weird way. Like he's got that like Southern plantation owner vibe to him in that movie, where it's like, why are we pitting this guy up against like a bunch of black people?
Well, I think that was part of the appeal, right? Like I think that was
Right.
sort of like on purpose and kind of like, and you know, he's this dastardly
But
guy
why?
who's
Like,
gonna
but
like
why?
fail at everything he does, even though he thinks he's smart. He, you know, he has like this sort of institutional kind of recognition, but he's not. He's like no match for just like a fiery old black lady.
Right.
I mean, I think that was sort of like the what they were going for. Do
You
we
know,
know if this
you
movie was
just-
successful? Do we know if it like people liked
It wasn't. It wasn't like
We're the only three
it was-
people that have ever seen this movie.
No, I mean it definitely like the Coen Brothers on this movie at this time are on fire, and they're not gonna make a unsuccessful movie financially anyway. I guess Man Who Wasn't There wasn't like a crazy big success, but even that made its money back and stuff. So like, but this one, it has like 50% on Rotten Tomatoes. People still, much like Intolerable Cruelty, are dazzled by the Coen Brothers enough that like they're saying like things in the reviews where they're like, at least it's like intelligent. Like that's like the big thing.
Well, I think it speaks to like how the dire state of like post
Right.
90s comedy movies.
Exactly.
That there's still kind of people are like it's smart, it's weird.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, yeah.
It's funny you say that. I
least,
had to
yeah.
actually listen to some review of some YouTube. It was like Mark Kermode and a bunch of other people, and this random British guy. It's all this British panel, and the film had just come out, and the guy's like, "Yeah, I love this movie. It's actually a refreshingly smart twist on this take of blah blah blah. I love this one part," and then I just turned it right off. I was like, "That's all
Don't
I need
listen
to
to
hear."
British people.
But I thought
That's
it was
just good
funny. They
advice.
considered
They
it.
talk weird because they're weird.
But it was interesting. I'm like, this guy thought this was intelligent, but with respect to what, and I probably should have like contextualized what else was coming out around this time when this movie was out.
I mean,
I couldn't remember.
I think we're hitting we're in the early days of the sort of what they call the frat pack movies, which are like starts with Old School in probably 2001, and then we get all these Wedding Crashers, like all of those movies,
right.
where it's like those are like the big comedies of this era. Anyway, so like, yeah, it's bad in terms of like, Hanks, but like Hanks is at the end of this. This is the like a bad era for him. He's I don't think that he's a funny actor. He's a guy who's like
Wait a minute.
made
Big?
a
You don't
lot
think
of-
he's funny in Big?
No, let me finish my thought, because I think that like Big is a masterful performance and he's hilarious in it. In that era, he's hilarious. He does like, Splash is also very funny, and like, even
The Burbs.
like The Burbs is
Joe versus the
fucking
Volcano?
hilarious. And like exactly. So he's making these movies that are, and that's an underrated movie, but it's another one like that has become almost too underrated,
Yes, exactly.
too rated.
Okay.
Exactly.
So because it's like it was great as a cult funny movie, but then
Right.
like once everybody's just like, no, that's the best Tom Hanks movie, you're like, hold on,
okay.
take a minute. But yeah, it is very funny also in parts. But then he starts going too into that comedic persona when he starts making, I don't even know what the right example of that movie that doesn't work in that time period, but they start to not work when he starts to like scream too much in his movies, when he's just like suddenly his character, his comedic persona is just like Turner and Hooch, maybe, like that thing where it's like suddenly he's just like the put upon guy that's just like, oh, come on. He's like doing that thing all the time.
Yeah.
And then it stops being funny. And then like when that happens, he becomes like, okay, well then I'm going to make like Philadelphia and Saving Private Ryan and like, all these like really opposite of those movies, like just, I guess like The Middle Ground, which is a great movie, that like transitioned him from those movies to those serious ones, was like A League of Their Own, where he like plays it very serious, but it's like in a sort of bubblegum movie,
Yeah.
And he has these things, and then like the serious actor Tom Hanks like gets away from him, and he becomes too much like that, and like that's what you're seeing in this movie, where he's like trying to like break free from that, but it doesn't work that well. And then he has like 10 years where he's just making these shitty movies. Like now he's kind of good again in a weird way. Like I kind of really do like most of what he does. Like I liked Bridge of Spies and like,
Cloud Atlas.
Could it just be that he's like that he's just a good actor, but is sometimes in bad movies? Like I don't know if
But I don't think he's good when he's bad. That's the difference. Is that like when I mean that's a very stupid sentence, but like I really do think that like when he's bad, he's very bad to me. Like when he made that shitty, what was it called? The Terminal.
The Terminal. I'm Victor Navorsky. Who else? I am Tom Hanks. That was so weird. It's just
like in this movie where it's like, what the like this is not funny, it's not good, like you're just bad at this point. Like if he didn't have this pedigree of amazing performances in his past, and I'm a detractor of Forrest Gump, where like I will always say that's one of the worst movies ever made. It's terrible. And like he's doing that in that movie too, where it's just like he's going so big and over the top and it just does not work at all.
Right. Well, I am glad this movie is past us now. I'm so stoked to look at the next, I call it the next wave of Coen movies because it totally pivots from here.
It really is.
I think the next one is like like I said, I think it's like the beginning of a new phase for them. It is an adaptation of a book, and I think that's sort of like a restart. Like let's find something that inspires us in like the work of somebody else.
Right.
And it is crazy how many kind of parallels to their like their other stories are in this adaptation. And it's like it's a new style for them, but like, they still kind of like we'll talk about it I guess next week.
Yeah, I can't wait. I loved it. I mean, it's been a few years since I've seen it, but it was one of my favorites when I saw it, and I read the book also. I think it's I can't wait to talk about it.
I just have like a list of things from this movie that we didn't get to talk about.
Yeah, please do.
Well, so the painting of the husband. That is a gag that is taken from an old
Sullivan's
movie.
Travels.
What? It is from Sullivan's Travels.
It's Sullivan's Travels. It's the lady that he crawls out of her window with a thing, and her husband's portrait is on the wall, and then it changes to like.
Thank you. I was trying to remember what movie it was. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. So.
Yep. I wanted to also mention really quick about this movie while we're just doing notes. Like it was written by the Coen Brothers for Barry Sonnenfeld to direct, who's obviously their old cinematographer, and he was going to direct it for a long time until he just like dropped out of it, probably
Wisely?
because he like saw that it wasn't working,
Well, it's funny that the visuals have such a Barry Sonnenfeld kind of vibe.
I was going to say
yeah.
it would be interesting to see what this would have been if it had been Barry Sonnenfeld, because like it still probably wouldn't have worked, but maybe it would have worked, in a different way. I don't know.
I'm not curious about that. I just want to say one of my wife's like pet peeves is when a movie flashes back to a character's childhood and beyond all reason the character has the same hairdo as a child that they have as an adult.
That's so funny.
Like she
freaks
out. And she's like, why do we have the same exact haircut?
Same.
It's so true.
Thank you.
It's so funny.
So when he had that same like exact hairdo, it was kind of like, okay, that's pretty bad.
Right.
Thank you, Jenny.
That's really funny.
Yeah.
And
then
I know we're kind of past this. They don't do, again, we don't even have to talk about this, but they don't really do any of their big, again, like last week, they don't do any of the parts that they, the roles that they always have, the actors, I should say, that they always use in this movie. They don't also do any of the motifs that they usually use. There's no like
narration,
serious.
There is a part where somebody yells at somebody that they're not a man. That's Marlon Wayans to what's his name?
To JK.
And then there's also the old lady tells the sheriff to take an interest in the young boy with the blaster, which was, I think, a callback to Barton Fink, where he's like, he's taken an interest.
And then he says, Lump says, thank God we didn't talk about Lump in this episode. Lump says, I mean, we just breezed right on by that.
We made the point that, it's a problematic portrayal.
But he says, who's stupid now?
Which is a recurring line, yes.
Yeah, they say that in 5 or 6 movies.
Right.
And then finally, there's a reference. She says, in the 60s, we had a Jew with a guitar, which I feel like is a reference to like the folk movement, which is like a foreshadowing of Llewyn Davis. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. They had been working on Llewyn Davis by this point, so you're probably absolutely
interesting.
Right. I know Chris is probably getting ready to wrap up, so I will really quickly say my ranking. I know you don't like this anymore, Travis, but Fargo.
Fine.
Big Lebowski, I'm going to piss you off again. Miller's Crossing's back up at number 3. Then Raising Arizona. Then Blood Simple has moved up this week. Cool. I don't know why. Maybe it's just because there's no comedy in this movie that I'm like disrespecting their comedies a little bit more.
Yeah.
Then The Man Who Wasn't There, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, Barton Fink, Headsucker Proxy, Intolerable Cruelty, Ladykillers.
Yeah,
Nice.
I'll just say, I'll go next just because my list is exactly the same. Just put this one at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly what I was going to say. Same exact thing. In fact, only Raising Arizona might switch with the one above it. It's moving up a little bit. I just think about it a little bit more. It's one of those,
Raising Arizona, so good.
Yeah, movies. It's weird, You see a movie and you're like, yeah, and then it just kind of fades over time. Like, respect to Chloe Zhao and to Frances McDormand, but Nomadland, loved it when I saw it. Didn't think about it at all after that. It's movies that just kind of, I don't know. So it's certain movies come back around, and I think Raising Arizona is in my head a little bit more than it used to be. So right on, it's rising on.
Well, I just listened to the Miller's Crossing episode of our podcast, and that movie, it's all right.
It's all right. He says.
I just don't.
It's all right.
I don't know. I just don't get it. I mean,
Agreed.
I just, well,
Right
as long
there.
as you're on my side, Chris.
Right there with you. It's toward the bottom of my list, but
Democratically, as a podcast, we are anti-Miller's Crossing. That's all I need. I love Miller's Crossing. I'm just kidding. Yeah.
I'm just going to keep bumping it up.
You're like adding it to my list somehow. I'm like, how did this happen?
Yeah, because at the end, every movie's going to get a point rating where it's like number 1 gets, 17 points or whatever. So we'll see what the actual best movie
When our podcast is only released as a spreadsheet, that's when we'll be successful.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right.
All right, guys. Good talk.
all right, guys.
Fucking bad
Stoked
movie.
for next week. Glad this one's behind us.
Yes.
Oof, can breathe again.
Yeah. I mean, there's not really, I don't think, a bad movie coming now. Like Hail Caesar I've got problems with, but we're through the worst of it now.
Agreed.
Agreed.
It's really offensive.
I think so.
All right, guys.
Cool.
All right,
Always
guys.
a pleasure, gentlemen. Until the next time.
See you next week.
See ya.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Auteur Detour. We'll see you again next week.